Kirashnor Surpazan Hayr, Reverend Fathers, dear friends at Saint Illuminators, and those watching online. I would first and foremost like to thank His Eminence, Archbishop Anushavan, for giving me this opportunity to speak on a very important topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I believe is vital to our church's very survival. Remarkably, His Holiness Aram I, Catholicos of the Holy See of Cilicia, has always had his hand on the pulse of the faithful within our churches. And certainly this proclamation is proof of that. The fact that he has called for renewal of spiritual life among our faithful and subsequently setting out in such great detail what this entails and how best to attain it, we are shown His Holiness's declaration that this was not a casual decision, but rather an imperative in view of the diminution of pivotal importance of the spiritual life in Armenian life. Before reflecting on the 12 fatherly recommendations which Veapar concludes this year's declaration with, I would like to commend and thank Reverend Father Samuel Ajemian, pastor of All Saints Church in Glenville, Illinois, for his concise presentation last week of the encyclical's core message. Now, we all know that whenever we are faced with a problem, we must first articulate that problem, discover its cause or causes, and assess its ramifications. And while this gives us insight to what the problem is and how it will affect us, by no means does it provide a solution. Thus, His Holiness has gone that extra mile, not only to identify the problem, but also how to approach its solution. In fact, Veapar has identified 12 specific actions which he feels will act as catalysts for great change among our people in establishing a new sense of renewed spiritual life. To summarize, the recommendations are as follows. First, the Bible must become an inseparable part of our life. Second, parallel to the Bible, it is essential to read religious literature. Third, conferences and seminars about spiritual values must be organized by the various prelacies. We must explain and convey to the public the meaning of and the reason for the holy Badarak and services and sacraments of the Church. We must celebrate the feast days of saints and bring about the revitalization of traditions. The Nicene Creed and the Confession of Sins should be read frequently in private to ourselves. Church services in translation should be followed by the faithful with accessible service books. The reorganization of humanitarian and pastoral services by parish churches should be accomplished. Promote and or create spiritual brotherhoods or faith-based societies that operate under the patronage of the Church. Teach the meaning of the holy Badarak, which is in fact the reason for communion with the body and blood of Christ. Establish centers devoted to humanitarian work and social services, as well as to support the needy. And lastly, keep our parish churches open to our faithful, allowing them to visit the house of God at any time and not just on Sundays or when there are services. So before I offer my thoughts on these points, let me mention that Veapar's first recommendation about the Bible being a vital and inseparable part of our lives will be addressed by Deacon Shant during the last lecture of this series, and nobody could do it better than him. Let me also say that as I was reflecting upon His Holiness's recommendations, it suddenly struck me that our Eastern prelacy had realized to a certain degree the need for a spiritual makeover, a spiritual reawakening almost 50 years ago. Let me explain. I was a relatively newly ordained priest when His Eminence Archbishop Mesrop of blessed memory became prelate in 1978. That same year, I was honored to be elected to serve on the Religious Council and also was elected secretary, and thus had the opportunity to participate in and contribute to his new vision for the prelacy, which was a church renewed in spirit and laser focused on Jesus Christ. Over the past 50 years, many initiatives have been undertaken, committees formed, and activities developed for this very reason. The roots of what we do today go back to that time. And without going into detail, and based on the needs that were perceived as lacking within the prelacy, needs much like those which Vehapar has articulated, steps were taken to attempt to meet the challenge of re-engaging our people in the life of our church through a variety of different means. The Armenian Religious Education Council was established by Archbishop Mesrop in 1980 to oversee the entirety of religious education throughout the prelacy, creating opportunities for our parishes to lead our people to Christ. In 1982, the prelacy hired the first full-time director of religious education. Sunday school teacher seminars were organized by the newly formed ARIC, as we call the Armenian Religious Education Council, as were spiritual retreats for our youth and young adults. From among these activities for the youth was born the St. Gregory of Datev Institute. It had a simple goal: to enhance the knowledge and abilities of deacons and acolytes who serve in our churches through education, training, Bible study, and socialization. Within a few years, this initial deacon and acolyte training seminar evolved into one of the most successful youth-oriented programs within the Armenian Church. Most importantly, even though it is called an institute, Datev is much more than just a classroom experience. Its emphasis is on instruction, fellowship, and prayer. These three core elements of the program, designed to foster strong friendships, promote a healthy community, and deepen faith, character, and Armenian Christian identity, are essential to the growth of our youth spiritually. This program has given us 5 priests, dozens of deacons, and scores of those who serve in their parishes today as acolytes, choir members, Sunday school teachers and directors, trustees, and our NRA delegates. At least 2 of our graduates are Yeretskins, and some of our Datevatsis have married other Datevatsis. Not to mention that we have many participants today who are next-gen Datevatsis. And actually, if you think about it, this program addresses His Holiness's first 4 recommendations at the very least: the Bible becoming an inseparable part of life, reading religious literature, organizing conferences and seminars about spiritual values, and explaining and conveying the meaning of and reason for the Badarak and the services and sacraments of our church. Veapar's vision for a church that is filled with spiritually savvy and truly believing Christians is a bold and positive step for our church. And lest we feel that in some way we, here in the United States, have failed in fostering this spirit of renewal over the years, or that no matter what we might undertake, the idea that nothing will change. Let me point out that from my own childhood, around 70 years ago, until today, I have seen huge changes in our prelacy regarding its approach to spiritual renewal and reawakening. If you allow me, I'm going to share some of what I have seen throughout the years, which also happen to intersect with Veapar's recommendations. So the first is Sunday school. I remember as a youngster realizing that I often knew more than my teachers. In one of my parishes, imagine that, a Sunday school teacher told me she was teaching reincarnation. You see, there was no curriculum specific to the Armenian Church. I remember our Sunday school taught us about the Bible using evangelical Protestant resources that the teachers themselves did not understand. Today, thanks to religious education seminars and modern curriculum materials geared to the Armenian Church's faith and doctrines, we have well-prepared and effective teachers in our Sunday school classrooms. Church services, all of our services were in classical Armenian, and sermons, I would say, were always in Armenian as well. Communion was never given on Sundays. I don't know if any of you out there in the audience or listening or watching online remember those days when on regular Sundays, the altar curtain opened at communion time, the priest turned around, blessed the people with the chalice and the host, and the curtain closed. If someone wanted to take communion, they would have had to have let the dead hide know in advance or told the Board of Trustees. And when somebody did receive communion at any time other than Christmas or Easter, there was always the question of, wow, what has that person done that they have to take communion? So today, while our Badarak is still celebrated in classical Armenian, worship has been enhanced by the publication of very clear and understandable translations, which allow people to follow along and comprehend more of what is being said and done. Some of our churches even use technology to project the English text with transliteration on large screens placed near the altar so people won't have to keep looking down at their books. Sermons in English have become a weekly practice in most, if not all, of our churches. Sacraments and other services are often done wholly or partly in English. And I know that some churches do readings and the Nicene Creed in English as well as in Armenian. And of course, through exhortation and explanation over the years, it has become natural for our faithful to take communion every week, which of course is the whole reason for Badarak. Otherwise, it would be like going to a restaurant, ordering a great meal, and then leaving without eating. One practice that has developed from the 2020 COVID pandemic is the live streaming of church services. Many churches continue to do this even though there are no longer any restrictions for church attendance. I believe this is a particularly effective way of reaching out and engaging the faithful, especially the frail and elderly, or those who would otherwise be deprived of any spiritual sustenance because they couldn't make it to church. I recently had experience with this when a week ago Sunday, I found myself, instead of in church, in the emergency room, where I thought I would just go get some medication and leave, but for which I had to remain for a longer time, and was really uplifted by watching a live stream of Badarak. Religious studies. Back then, Bible study was unheard of. That was considered polkagan. No one taught us about the Badarak either, and certainly not about our church's beliefs and doctrines. It wasn't until I started going to a Catholic high school that I received the baseline educationally for understanding Christianity as a starting point for learning about my own church, which I had to do by personal study and research. Today, almost every one of our churches has Bible study and or adult religious education programs. Our prelacy, through AUDIC, produces online virtual Bible studies, lectures such as this, and prayers and other means of reaching our people and strengthening their faith throughout the year. Seminars and retreats. Again, these were non-existent when I was growing up. Thanks to the efforts of AUDIC, retreats and seminars for high school and college students were launched with great success. Local and regional seminars were held for Sunday school teachers, choir members, and the general public. Today, these continue, some in person, some online. But the greatest legacy of these endeavors, for me, continues to be the St. Gregory of Datev Institute. And of course, another offshoot of these activities is the Salt and Light youth groups, active in many of our parishes, overseen by the Prelacy's Youth Ministry Department with its own dedicated director. Charitable and humanitarian initiatives. Growing up, our families and our churches prioritized Armenians as the recipients of their generosity. I remember my grandmother faithfully every month sending a check to her family in Egypt. Collectively, funds were taken up to aid Armenians who survived the genocide in various parts of the world, to help Armenians displaced by World War II to come to America, to assist Armenians in the Middle East and in the homeland. And it wasn't until 1988 and the devastating earthquake that Armenians saw the great global response to this horrible tragedy and understood that we could no longer not see what was going on around us. Imagine, Odar governments and people were rallying their resources to help the Armenians, physically, in person, as well as financially. Today, our prelacy continues to respond to the needs of Armenians throughout the world, yet also offers humanitarian aid to non-Armenian people who have suffered devastation through natural disasters such as fires, hurricanes, and earthquakes. And many churches have annual drives to collect food, clothing, or financial resources to help the non-Armenian community at large. I share all of this with you today, not to boast or not to say that we have already been there and done that, but to encourage you to commit yourself to the idea of renewing and enhancing the spiritual life of our churches and our fellow Armenian Christians. Remember, Change starts with you. Open your arms to your church and embrace the one who said, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Isaiah 40:31. And come to me, all you are who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Matthew 11:28. So I would like to conclude my reflection this evening with the words that Veapar chose to close his declaration with. Dear Armenian sons and daughters, let us live our spiritual life through the means that we are comfortable with, yet never stay away from our church, from the Bible's teachings, the dogma, doctrines, traditions, and mission of our church. Let us live our spiritual life eschewing performative behavior for the sake of appearance, and instead, let us serve and lend a helping hand to the needs of our nation and homeland as the supreme expression of love. Thank you, Vehaparder, for your vision and concern for the sheep of your flock. Thank you to all of you who sat through this, and may God bless you all.